So the book of Esther is a very unique book. It is unique in that it is only one of two books in the Bible that are named after women. The other one is Ruth. Now, the events of the book of Esther are all historical. They're not mythological. They are set in history. They have real characters. There is a real plot, and there are real twists and turns. Historically, the events of Esther occurred between King Cyrus, who issued a decree for the Jews to rebuild the temple in their homeland of Judea. This happens in 537 BC. This is the famous benevolent King Cyrus. And the other king, who's also playing a relevant role in historical events, is King Artaxerxes I. This is actually the stepson of Queen Esther. He is the king who issues another decree. This is in the time of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is another biblical character, and we've studied about him in the last lesson. Artaxerxes I, the stepson, it is widely believed, of Queen Esther, issues another decree to rebuild Jerusalem and its walls. So the events of Esther are actually occurring during chapters 6 and 7 of Ezra. If you remember, Ezra played a vital role. He was a learned man who wanted to revive the practices, the customs, the reverence for the law among the Jewish people. So Esther is sandwiched between these other great historical monumental events in history. Esther is very peculiar because it never mentions God's name directly. So why is it included in the Bible? There are others who have asked that question. It does not make any reference to the God of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, as many books in the Old Testament do. No mention, no references to the rescues of God, no reference to his miraculous works, nothing at all. Even in the middle of a crisis that the Jewish people are going through. So it is right to wonder, what place does it have in the Bible? Now, although it does not mention God's name directly, his overruling providence is seen right from the beginning up until the end. It only requires a careful, thoughtful reader, and they will see the guiding hand of God. The events of Esther are set not in Judea, not in Samaria. It is set outside the Jewish homeland. Remember, the Israelites and the southern kingdom of Judah both have gone into captivity. Judah was conquered by the Babylonians in 586 BC. Their temple was destroyed. Now there is no physical temple for the Jews to worship at, to keep their customs and traditions, or even to follow the law of Moses. They are outside of their comfort zone. There are Jews who have been born into captivity. They are spending 70 years under Babylonian captivity until King Cyrus, as was prophesied about in the book of Isaiah by the prophet, issues a decree to have the Jews return to Jerusalem. Now, Esther is covering the events that pertain to this group of people, the exiles, the captives who are living in Babylon, whose children have been born in Babylon. And it shows how God is sovereign, not only in their homeland, but is keeping a close watch over his people, even when they are in exile, even when they are under the thumb of their oppressor. This is a very significant book for the Jews. They celebrate the feast of Purim. Purim is because of, events described in the book of Esther. Purim is celebrated in spring on the 14th or the 15th day of Adar, the Hebrew month of Adar. And during this feast, commonly they read through Megillah Esther, or the scroll of Esther, recounting the historical events as well as the miraculous deliverance of the Jewish people by God. It's also interesting, children use rattles. Whenever Haman is the villain in the story, whenever his name comes up, children use rattles to block out his name. So it's essentially replaying some of the events that occurred in the book, and they're remembering with gratitude and thankfulness how God sovereignly preserved his people thousands of years ago. There is typology in the book of Esther, meaning there is reference to Christ, and you may find that interesting because we've heard of male types of Christ. Joseph is an example, David is an example, but Esther is only one of the female types of Christ. Why is that? Because there are some traits of her and her role that she played in the events in the book that typify her. Just as Jesus sacrificed himself for his people, you find Esther willing to sacrifice herself and her interests in order to bring deliverance to her people. Now, what is the historical setting of this book? If you go to Esther chapter 1, it is actually describing the circumstances under which the events took place. For example, if you look at the very first chapter, it describes the great King Xerxes. Now, this king, King Xerxes, he had a vast empire. His kingdom stretched from India to Ethiopia. It covered actually much of the ancient world. And it was extremely diverse because these people all belonged to different cultures, different ethnicities, different languages, food types. So it's a very diverse set of peoples that King Xerxes reigned over. The capital of his kingdom was in Shushan or Susa, present-day Khuzestan in Iran. Now, the Jews who were brought to Babylon and were now living under the Persian Empire, they were scattered throughout the province. There were a lot of Jews who also lived in the capital city, in Susa. Now, these Jews, they continued to live in Susa, in the province of King Xerxes, even after King Cyrus had allowed them to go back to their homeland. There were many Jews who simply chose not to, and God did not force them to. They continued to stay behind in the land that had become familiar to them. They established businesses, they married, they gave their children off in marriage, they planted vineyards, they settled down, and they had stable lives. So there weren't very many people willing to uproot a stable existence and go to Judea, where they would essentially have to rebuild their lives from scratch. There were a dedicated few who did take the arduous journey, and the Bible commends them. They received able leadership, including under Ezra and Nehemiah, but Esther and Mordecai are among the Jews who stayed back, who did not go back to their homeland even when given the chance to. Is there any archaeological evidence of the characters in the book? Perhaps. We cannot be dogmatic about this, but archaeologists, when they were excavating Persepolis in Iran, modern-day Iran, discovered a stone tablet with the name Marduka. This discovery happened in 1930. Marduka is close to Mordecai. And there is another, ancient record which shows an official who was in King Xerxes' administration with a similar name, Marduka. So it is believed that, or at least there is a hint that this may refer to the same person because the timelines match. Let's look at the circumstances that are described in chapter 1, because that is important for us to grasp, because it is really the opening scene. What is happening here? King Xerxes, the great king, the ruler of the then known world, is preparing for a great historical battle. He is organizing a 6-month, essentially it's a strategy session, to counter the Greek threat. And that 6-month strategy session is followed by a mega lavish party This is in the palace grounds, and he's showing off his wealth and his splendor and his royal might, because he is going to form a large army to march towards Athens. He is confident that he will bring the Greek people to their heels and crush the revolt against his empire, because he had such a large military force against a much, much smaller Greek force. This is the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. This is between the Persian Empire, and it's an alliance of Greek city-states led by Sparta under King Leonidas. If you've seen the movie 300, it released in 2006, you will remember this bloody, thrilling battle, which was the premise of that movie. So here is King Xerxes. He has a large army with 150,000 soldiers, and he is fending off a much smaller force of about 7,000. You would think victory was assured, but that's not how events pan out. He is defeated, and he may have been very demoralized, which is not surprising. And it is in this incredible moment in history that Esther is rising to prominence. She is brought to King Xerxes' palace after King Xerxes, in a fit of anger, deposes his reigning queen, Queen Vashti, and instead conducts a hunt for beautiful women across the land, and Esther ends up being appointed queen by him. When Esther is brought to the palace, it is 479 BC. This is a year after Thermopylae, which happens in 480 BC. And he's returning defeated. And he's humbled. It's completely unexpected. And this is what is described in the very first verse of chapter 1. It says, this is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. So he went all out. He's probably thinking victory is practically assured. But unfortunately for him, that's not what happens. His father, Darius, King Darius, was previously similarly defeated by the Greeks. So really, this was not a battle he could have afforded to have lost. Instead, he loses it and experiences severe depletion of his resources. It's also a blow to his prestige. He's defeated in his attempts to invade Greece. And this is a man who you will see through his patterns described in the book of Esther is a powerful man, but he's also rash. He's hot-tempered. He's self-centered. And he's also a wicked man, because you can understand that through the treatment that he metes out in accumulating a harem full of women. This king is interestingly also prophesied in the book of Daniel. He is prophesied as the fourth king of Persia. And the book of Daniel, this particular prophecy in Daniel 11, describes the fourth king of Persia as being richer than all the others, and also suggests that he will try to invade Greece. And you will know from history that, shortly after the Persian Empire, you have the rise of Alexander the Great. The mighty Greek Empire rises to the world stage and overthrows the Persian Empire. Now, Esther is an obscure young woman, right? She could never have imagined that this was the turn of events her life would take. She would never have imagined that she would end up in the palace. She is an ordinary woman. She is not expecting great things for herself. But Esther, her name is Persian. The name Esther is Persian, and it is believed to have derived from Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess, or it could also refer to star. It's not unusual for people when they move to other lands to be given or to take for themselves a second name, a Babylonian name or a Persian name. In this case, Esther, as beautiful as it is not a Hebrew name. The Hebrew name is Hadassah, which is the myrtle tree, also lovely. But, we know her by her Persian name, Esther, because she's known as Queen Esther in the palace of King Xerxes. She's from the tribe of Benjamin, and her cousin is Mordecai. Mordecai is her loving cousin who has raised her up, brought her up as a father figure when she's lost her parents. She's grown up in captivity. She has never known home, and she's brought up among the exiles. She does not have freedom of her own. She does not really have any control over her lot or over the events or circumstances of her life. Now, when you think about all of these events, you're not necessarily thinking, how wonderful for her. If you did not know the rest of the story, you would not really sense the providential goodness of God, right? But it's only when you dive deep into the book, you realize that there is so much richness here. There is so much beauty, there is so much wonder, and God is so good and gracious and kind to this woman who lost everything, ends up in the palace outside of her control, but is given the opportunity to make such a beautiful impact, lasting throughout generations, which will be remembered for years to come. Now, this does not look like goodness, but this is the providential goodness of God. Even when our eyes cannot see, when we cannot interpret it as goodness, God is working behind the scenes, working events for the good of His people, and ultimately for His glory.